Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that every decision you've made, every career path chosen, every relationship pursued, every moment of anxiety felt, wasn't entirely yours. Not stolen by some shadowy conspiracy, but gently guided by forces so seamlessly integrated into daily existence that questioning them feels as unnatural as questioning gravity itself. You believed you were free. You believed your thoughts were your own. But what if the architecture of modern life has been engineered to produce a very specific type of human being, productive, anxious, endlessly striving, yet perpetually dissatisfied? Stay with me, because what we will uncover here is rarely discussed, deeply uncomfortable. And the last insight will be the most powerful of all. Modern life moves fast, faster than the human mind was ever designed to move. Philosophers, psychologists, and thinkers across generations warned us that when speed replaces meaning, something vital is lost. Friedrich Nietzsche cautioned that a society without deep values eventually replaces truth with distraction. Carl Jung observed that when individuals disconnect from their inner world, the unconscious begins to rule them from the shadows. Yet today, these warnings are often ignored, dismissed as outdated, or buried beneath endless noise. The great secret of modern society is not that people are controlled by force, but that they are guided without realizing it. Not through chains, but through habits, not through oppression, but through constant stimulation. We are told we are freer than ever. Yet many feel more mentally exhausted, emotionally fragmented, and spiritually empty than any generation before. Why is that? Before we go deeper, take a moment to support this channel. Subscribe, leave a like, share this video, and comment your thoughts. What you are about to hear may challenge what you believe about success, happiness, and freedom. And it may change the way you see your own life and the world around you. At the heart of modern society lies a silent trade. Attention is exchanged for comfort. Depth is exchanged for convenience. Reflection is exchanged for constant engagement. The human mind, once shaped by silence, contemplation, and struggle, is now surrounded by endless inputs. Notifications, expectations, comparisons, and artificial standards shape how people measure their worth. Picture yourself scrolling through your phone at 11 p.m., knowing you should sleep but unable to stop. Consider that hollow feeling after achieving something you worked years for, the promotion, the purchase, the milestone, only to find the satisfaction evaporating within days, replaced by a vague hunger for something more. Think about how often you feel busy yet empty, connected yet isolated, informed yet confused. These aren't personal failures. They're symptoms of something far more systematic, far more insidious than most people ever recognize. The great secret isn't hidden in classified documents or whispered in elite circles. It's operating in plain sight, embedded in the very fabric of what we call normal life. It doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. It has convinced us that the way we live, rushing from task to task, measuring worth through productivity, seeking validation through screens, medicating discomfort with entertainment, is simply how things are, how they've always been, how they must be. But here's the disturbing truth: previous generations didn't live this way. They didn't experience this particular brand of existential exhaustion. They faced hardships we can barely imagine, yet they possessed something increasingly rare today: an inner stability, a rootedness in meaning that didn't require constant external reinforcement. What changed? What happened between then and now that transformed human consciousness so fundamentally that most people can no longer recognize what's been lost? Consider this paradox: we have more freedom than any civilization in human history, yet anxiety and depression rates climb relentlessly. We have access to infinite information, yet wisdom seems increasingly scarce. We're more connected than ever, yet loneliness has become epidemic. We have every tool for self-improvement, yet self-doubt intensifies. How is it possible to have more of everything, more opportunities, more choices, more resources, and feel worse? The answer isn't that people have become weaker or less resilient. The answer is that modern society has discovered something previous systems of control never managed to achieve: how to make people police themselves, how to make oppression feel like freedom, how to transform human attention, desire, and identity itself into resources to be harvested. And the most brilliant aspect of this system is that it makes you believe you're choosing it all freely. You weren't born wanting to be constantly productive. You weren't born fearing stillness. You weren't born defining your worth through comparison. These responses were cultivated, carefully and systematically, through mechanisms so subtle they became invisible. The question isn't whether you're being influenced, you are, constantly. The question is whether you'll ever realize it deeply enough to break free. What lies beneath the surface of modern existence is a transformation so complete, so total, that most people mistake it for reality itself. They don't see the cage because the bars are made of habits, expectations, and normalized behaviors that feel as natural as breathing. They don't feel controlled because the control operates through their own desires, fears, and sense of identity. But there are cracks in the facade. Moments when the machinery becomes visible. When you catch yourself mid-scroll, wondering why you opened the app. When achievement feels hollow. When you realize you can't remember the last time you sat in complete silence without reaching for a distraction. These moments are invitations, glimpses of something your deepest self is trying to tell you. The secret we're about to explore doesn't just explain why modern life feels increasingly suffocating. It reveals the specific mechanism that has reshaped human consciousness, the psychological trap that keeps people running on a treadmill they never consciously chose to step onto. And most importantly, it illuminates the path towards something most people have forgotten is even possible, genuine freedom, not as a political concept, but as a state of being. The mechanism behind this transformation operates through a principle psychologists call cognitive ease. Your mind, designed for survival in a world of immediate physical threats, naturally gravitates toward what feels familiar, repeated, and socially validated. Modern society has weaponized this tendency. It doesn't force you into conformity, it makes conformity feel like personal choice. Over time, the rhythm of wake, work, consume, entertain, sleep, and repeat becomes so normalized that questioning it feels absurd, even threatening. Viktor Frankl, who survived the depths of human suffering in concentration camps, discovered that meaning is the primary motivation of human existence. When meaning fades, anxiety and despair rush in to fill the void. Look around honestly and ask yourself, how often do people speak about meaning today? Instead, society teaches pursuit of productivity, visibility, and approval. Success becomes quantified rather than felt. Happiness becomes displayed rather than lived. The emptiness that follows isn't personal failure, it's a structural consequence of how modern life is designed. French philosopher Michel Foucault argued that the most effective form of control is not repression but self-regulation. When individuals internalize expectations, they police themselves. They feel guilty for resting, anxious for slowing down, inadequate for not constantly improving. The system no longer needs to pressure them, they do it voluntarily. This is where something profound occurs, desire itself is reshaped. What you want may not originate from your deepest values but from external narratives constantly reinforced around you. Advertising doesn't merely sell products, it sells identities. Social platforms don't just connect people, they suggest who you should become, what you should fear, what success should look like. Over time, these suggestions sink into the unconscious mind, becoming indistinguishable from authentic desire. Carl Jung warned that when unconscious forces are not made conscious, they direct your life, and you call it fate. Pause and ask yourself with brutal honesty, how many of your goals were consciously chosen, and how many were absorbed through osmosis? How many of your fears are truly yours, and how many were planted by comparison and expectation? The unsettling truth is that modern society trains people to look outward for validation while losing contact with their inner compass. Social philosopher Eric Fromm observed that modern humans increasingly confuse having with being. We accumulate experiences, objects, recognition, and achievements, yet feel strangely hollow. We collect moments for display rather than depth. We pursue goals because everyone else is pursuing them, not because they align with who we actually are beneath the performance. When silence disappears, self-awareness weakens. When reflection becomes uncomfortable, distraction becomes addictive. The constant demand to perform, improve, and compare leaves little space for the most important questions. Who am I becoming? What truly matters? Am I living according to my values, or merely reacting to the world around me? Neuroscientists confirm what ancient philosophers already understood: the human brain requires periods of stillness to integrate experiences and regulate emotions. Without them, stress becomes chronic and clarity fades. Yet modern society subtly discourages stillness. Silence feels awkward. Boredom feels unbearable. So people keep moving, scrolling, consuming, never realizing they're running from themselves. This is only the surface. The mechanism runs deeper still, reshaping not just behavior but identity itself. And understanding how this happens, how the system makes its control feel natural, even desirable, requires examining the invisible architecture of modern desire and fear. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman described modern life as liquid: values shift quickly, relationships become fragile, commitments feel temporary. Nothing feels solid enough to stand on. In such an environment, people cling to certainty wherever they can find it, even if that certainty is artificial. Trends replace traditions. Opinions replace principles. The result is a population constantly reacting, rarely reflecting. This constant reaction keeps people psychologically occupied. When attention is fragmented, depth becomes rare. Philosopher Martin Heidegger warned that when humans live only on the surface of existence, they forget the question of being itself. They become busy but not fulfilled, informed but not wise, connected but not whole. This is why so many feel exhausted without knowing why. Their energy is spent responding to demands that never end. Neuroscience reinforces this understanding. The brain adapts to stimulation. Dopamine-driven cycles of anticipation and reward make constant engagement feel necessary. Social media platforms, news feeds, and entertainment services are engineered around this neurological vulnerability. Over time, silence feels uncomfortable because the mind has been trained to avoid it. Yet it is precisely in silence that self-knowledge emerges. Without it, individuals lose the ability to sit with discomfort, uncertainty, and deep thought. They become dependent on noise to escape their own inner tension. This is not accidental. A distracted mind is easier to guide than a reflective one. A reactive individual is easier to influence than a grounded one. This doesn't require a villain or conspiracy. It's simply the outcome of systems designed for efficiency, profit, and scale rather than human depth. The tragedy is that many people sense something is wrong but cannot name it. They feel the hollowness but lack the language to articulate it. They recognize the exhaustion but mistake it for personal inadequacy rather than systemic design. And here lies the crucial point: awareness alone is not enough. Many recognize the emptiness yet feel powerless to change because the system doesn't only shape behavior, it shapes identity. To step away from constant connectivity feels like losing relevance. To slow down feels like falling behind. To question productivity feels like embracing failure. The fear of missing out is not really about information, it's about belonging, about maintaining a sense of self that has been constructed through external validation. Daniel Kahneman's research on cognitive biases reveals how the mind takes shortcuts, preferring ease over accuracy, familiarity over truth. Modern society exploits these biases systematically. Algorithms feed you content that confirms existing beliefs, creating echo chambers that feel like reality. Social comparison mechanisms trigger insecurity, driving consumption and engagement. Artificial urgency, limited time offers, breaking news, viral moments, hijacks your attention by triggering fear of loss. But beneath all the distraction, beneath the anxiety, beneath the constant motion, there lies a fundamental fear that modern society works desperately to avoid confronting. Until this fear is faced directly, no amount of productivity, entertainment, or success will bring lasting fulfillment. The question becomes unavoidable: what are we really running from? The answer is both simpler and more profound than most people imagine. And confronting it requires understanding not just what the system does to us, but what we've learned to do to ourselves in order to survive within it. At the deepest layer of this unspoken secret lies a fear so fundamental that modern society has built entire systems to avoid it, the fear of facing oneself without distraction, the fear of confronting emptiness, mortality, and personal responsibility. Existential philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. When human beings realize they are responsible for the meaning of their lives, the weight of that freedom can feel overwhelming. Modern society doesn't teach people how to carry that weight. It teaches them how to escape it. Distraction becomes a refuge. Constant activity becomes a shield. When life is filled with noise, there is no space to ask uncomfortable questions like, am I living authentically? Am I aligned with what truly matters to me? Am I avoiding something within myself? Psychologist Rollo May argued that modern anxiety is not the result of danger but of meaninglessness. When people are disconnected from purpose, fear takes diffuse forms, manifesting as restlessness, irritability, chronic dissatisfaction. This fear is amplified by how society frames success and failure. Achievement is externalized. Worth is measured by metrics, comparisons, visibility. Jean-Paul Sartre warned that when individuals define themselves through the gaze of others, they become prisoners of expectation. They live in bad faith, abandoning their inner truth to fit external roles. Over time, people no longer know what they genuinely want, they only know what they are supposed to want. But here is the radical truth that changes everything: the very thing modern society teaches people to avoid is the key to genuine freedom. Facing discomfort. Sitting with uncertainty. Engaging with silence. These experiences rebuild inner authority. They reconnect individuals with their values, boundaries, and sense of direction. The reclaiming of freedom does not begin with rebellion but with attention. Where attention goes, life follows. When attention is constantly fragmented, identity becomes fragmented as well. Psychologist William James stated that attention is the essence of will. To reclaim attention is to reclaim direction. This is why silence, reflection, and intentional limitation feel so uncomfortable at first. They restore something that has been numbed. The moment you begin asking, why am I doing this at all, instead of, what should I do next, the system loses its invisible grip. This question interrupts automatic living. It exposes habits that no longer serve meaning. It reveals fears disguised as ambition and avoidance disguised as productivity. This doesn't mean abandoning technology, society, or progress. It means engaging consciously rather than compulsively. Hannah Arendt warned that thoughtlessness, not evil, is the greatest danger to humanity. Thoughtlessness is living without examining one's actions, values, and motivations. Reflection is not a luxury, it is a safeguard against becoming a stranger to oneself. Psychologically, this shift creates resilience. Individuals who reconnect with inner values are less reactive, less dependent on validation, less vulnerable to manipulation. They can participate in modern life without being consumed by it. They move with clarity instead of pressure. They choose rather than drift. There is a quiet transformation that happens when someone slows down enough to listen inwardly. Anxiety loses its vague power and becomes a signal. Emptiness becomes an invitation rather than a threat. Fear becomes information rather than an enemy. Viktor Frankl taught that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies freedom. Modern society tries to fill that space. Conscious living protects it. The final and most powerful truth of modern society is this: freedom is not taken from people. It is slowly forgotten. Not because it is forbidden, but because it is replaced with comfort, distraction, and external direction. True freedom begins the moment a person stops outsourcing their inner authority. This is the secret almost no one talks about because it cannot be sold, optimized, or mass-produced. Philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that maturity is the courage to use one's own understanding without guidance from another. Yet modern society conditions people to constantly seek guidance outside themselves. Algorithms suggest what to watch. Trends suggest what to value. Metrics suggest what matters. Over time, individuals lose trust in their own judgment. They become efficient, informed, and connected, yet strangely dependent. This dependence is subtle, but it erodes autonomy from within. The most radical act today is not protest, withdrawal, or resistance. It is presence. To be fully present in your own life. To notice when you are acting from habit rather than intention. To question narratives that demand constant acceleration. To choose depth in a culture of surface. This quiet presence is profoundly disruptive to systems built on distraction. What makes this understanding so rare is that it demands something modern society rarely encourages: responsibility for one's inner life. Not responsibility imposed from outside, but a voluntary commitment to self-observation, self-honesty, and inner discipline. Psychologist Carl Rogers emphasized that growth begins when individuals stop defending an image of who they think they should be and start encountering who they actually are. This encounter is uncomfortable because it dismantles illusions carefully built over years of adaptation. From early life, people are trained to seek approval, avoid discomfort, and equate worth with performance. Over time, this creates an identity that is functional but fragile. It works as long as validation flows, goals are met, and distractions remain available. But when silence arrives, when failure occurs, or when meaning is questioned, cracks begin to appear. Modern society often treats these moments as problems to be fixed quickly rather than invitations to grow deeply. Philosophers of antiquity understood this process well. Socrates believed that the unexamined life was not worth living, not as an insult, but as a warning. Without examination, individuals inherit beliefs, fears, and desires without ever choosing them. They become characters in a script written by culture, habit, and expectation. Examination restores authorship. It allows a person to move from reaction to intention. This inner authorship does not emerge overnight. It is cultivated through small, consistent acts of awareness. Noticing emotional reactions instead of immediately escaping them. Questioning impulses instead of obeying them automatically. Allowing boredom without rushing to eliminate it. These moments strengthen psychological independence. They rebuild trust in one's own perception and judgment. Neuroscience supports this transformation. Studies on mindfulness and reflective practices show increased emotional regulation, reduced stress, and greater clarity in decision-making. But beyond measurable benefits, something more subtle occurs: a shift in identity. People stop defining themselves solely by roles, productivity, or external recognition. They begin to experience themselves as conscious participants in their own lives. This shift changes how the world is perceived. Noise loses some of its power. Comparison becomes less persuasive. Urgency feels optional rather than mandatory. Life slows internally, even if externally it remains complex. This internal slowing creates space for wisdom, something information alone can never provide. Modern society excels at providing answers but rarely teaches people how to ask meaningful questions. Yet questions shape consciousness more than answers ever could. When individuals learn to ask better questions of themselves, they naturally live differently. They choose relationships with more intention. They engage work with clearer boundaries. They consume less, not from discipline, but from discernment. This is why the great secret remains largely unspoken. A population grounded in self-awareness, inner authority, and reflective depth is difficult to manipulate. Such individuals still participate in society, but they are no longer driven by fear of missing out, fear of judgment, or fear of stillness. They act from alignment rather than pressure. Carl Jung famously said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light but by making the darkness conscious. Modern society prefers light without depth, positivity without truth, motivation without reflection. This avoidance of inner confrontation has consequences. When individuals do not face their inner conflicts, those conflicts seek expression elsewhere. They appear as projection, polarization, and hostility. Social tension increases because unresolved inner tension is externalized. People fight over symbols, ideologies, and identities, often without realizing that the real battle is internal. The world becomes a mirror of unexamined selves. Psychology confirms this pattern. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They manifest indirectly through stress-related illnesses, emotional numbness, or explosive reactions. When society discourages introspection, it produces individuals who are functional but fragile, capable but internally unstable. The cost is not immediately visible, but it accumulates over time. Ultimately, modern society does not collapse because of chaos but because of unconsciousness. And it heals not through control but through awareness. Each person who turns inward with honesty quietly weakens the forces that thrive on distraction. Each moment of presence restores something ancient and essential, the capacity to be with oneself without needing the world to constantly validate, entertain, or rescue you from your own existence. The great secret of modern society is that meaning cannot be provided from the outside. No system, ideology, or trend can replace the work of inner alignment. When individuals stop expecting the world to tell them who they are, they begin to live differently. They consume less noise. They tolerate silence. They act with coherence. And that quiet coherence is profoundly disruptive to systems built on distraction. The question is not whether the world will slow down. It will not. The question is whether you will cultivate an inner stillness strong enough to remain yourself within it. If you removed all expectations placed on you by society, every should, every must, every comparison, who would you choose to become? Not who you think you're supposed to be. Not who would impress others. But who you actually are beneath all the conditioning. This is where true freedom lives. Not in doing whatever you want without consequence, but in knowing yourself deeply enough to choose consciously. In recognizing when you're being driven by external pressure versus internal alignment. In developing the courage to disappoint others when necessary to honor yourself. In understanding that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with your own consciousness. The world will continue its acceleration. Demands will multiply. Distractions will evolve. But you can become the still point in a turning world. You can reclaim the attention that has been colonized. You can rebuild the inner authority that has been outsourced. You can remember what it feels like to be genuinely present in your own existence. This is not a retreat from life but a return to it. Not an escape from challenge but an engagement with what actually matters. The secret has always been this simple and this difficult: wake up to how you've been living unconsciously, and choose differently. Not perfectly. Not all at once. But consciously, deliberately, one moment of genuine presence at a time.